don't aim to solve all the world's problems, but we do offer you peace of mind, hope, laughter, and ideas on how you can help improve circumstances and communities. Good change is for you. For us, we take to heart your concerns about anger, injustice, and helplessness, the pain that we each feel, and give you something better to witness, something better to believe in. In many ways, this podcast is the opposite of self-help. It's us help. We draw attention to kindness, to the better angels of our nature. We swap stories that bring smiles, deep breaths, inspiration, and ideas to help us evolve. We introduce you to people who are positively transforming lives, leaders of movements, or everyday heroes who are making change. Good change. Good change highlights the common ground we share, the unlimited positive impact of a single person, and the greater good. Welcome to Good Change, a podcast about making a world of difference. Please welcome your host and good change maker, Ken Streeter.
Hi, this is Ken Streeter with the Good Change podcast, and we're super lucky, grateful, excited to have today's guest. Blake Spalding is the founder, co-founder, and chef and co-operator of Hell's Backbone Grill and Farm, which is a fine dining establishment in remote Utah. Blake's background is one that is as diverse and interesting as they come. She's worked as a river guide. She's worked as a chef for adventure travel companies, and found her way to this little hamlet in Utah where she and her partner Jen opened up Hell's Backbone Grill and Farm now, where they grow a lot of their own organic food. So welcome to the show, Blake.
Thank you, Ken. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me.
You bet. And how are things shaping up this summer? I know you had a tough summer last year with the COVID close down, but are things looking better this summer?
Yeah, I feel a tremendous amount of relief that we have the Biden administration and a more favorable political climate. For me, and probably all restaurateurs, that's going to be a really important support system, because there's support for small business now.
Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down, and I agree completely. One of the things that recently happened was International Women's Day, and I know that you are a standard in a way, a role model, a mentor for women who have long sought creating their own destiny, being a successful entrepreneur, whatever. And so the question I have right off the bat is, how far have women come in your lifetime?
Ooh, not far enough, I mean, I turned 57 in February, and this is something I think about quite a lot, especially because most of my life, I've worked in sort of male-dominated fields, whether it was, adventure travel and, on river work, or in restaurants. And, I feel like we sort of take one step forward and take 6 giant steps backwards. And that's painful to see, and certainly this last 4 years under the Trump administration, it was very excruciating to be, to watch sort of the way that administration and kind of the GOP relates to women and women's rights and free agency. And it was very disturbing. It definitely kicked a lot of us into high gear, but it also, for me, was kind of weirdly traumatic. So I think, there's a little bit of forward progress, but we have a very long way to go. So in terms of gender parity, and particularly for women of color, at least I am a white woman, so I have race privilege anyway.
Yeah. So if 100 is perfect in terms of women and men having equal opportunities, equal compensation, equal regard, and 0 is the exact opposite of that, where are we today?
Oof, boy. Mm, I don't know, 37.
Wow, one third of the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's different for different places. I live in a very patriarchal state. I chose to live and build my business and career in Utah, which is a red state, and it's also a state that is heavily influenced by the Mormon faith, which is a particularly patriarchal religious structure.
Hmm.
And so, I don't know, maybe if I lived in New York City or something, I would have a different ratio. But I don't think I'm wrong. I think we're one third of the way there. I mean, women can have credit cards now,
Hmm.
and but even like just an example. So I live in, as I say, rural Utah. When I bought my house, my deed is made out to Blake Spalding, an unmarried woman, which is wild.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's real. That's just how it is here. Like there's so many vestiges of
Hmm.
kind of the gender inequity, at least I would say, you know, in this country very much. And I think when, I'm a very political person, so hopefully you don't mind if I speak a little bit politically, but I'm a huge, huge fan of Hillary Clinton.
Hmm.
And so it was a very significant for me when she got the presidential nomination, and I was so excited to have that sort of, you know, to clear that milestone or hurdle of having
Yeah.
our first ever woman president. And then instead to watch like the backlash of misogyny and like the way she was excoriated and the lies that were told and the false narratives. It was devastating for Jen and I. Jen's my business partner, so I'll reference her a lot, I should say. She's my best friend and my, extremely close business partner. We're not a couple. We're both single,
Hmm.
hetero. But it is the case that we were pretty devastated by that. And so there was a lot of joy and seeing Kamala Harris
Hmm.
uh, come into the vice presidency. But you know, the pain of that sort of off the charts misogyny was it cut deep for a feminist such as myself.
Yeah. So, just as a side note, my wife and I went and saw the Dixie Chicks when originally Hillary Clinton was the subject of one of their songs, and then Barack Obama became the subject of one of their songs. And um, so I'm a white dude in a conservative town, 60-year-old white guy, and I have no idea what it's like to suffer at the hands of misogyny, but I can tell you that I felt that pain too. And the digression was not something that I wanted for our country. And then of equal, if not greater importance, was not something that I wanted for my daughters.
Yeah, I love the Chicks. They dropped the Dixie
That's right.
recently.
That's right. Yeah.
They're amazing, and yeah, I've got a lot of joy out of listening to their music over the years. They're very fierce. I
Yeah.
I relate to them.
So that word is apropos at this point, the word fierce. You described the town that you're living in now, Boulder, Utah, which I think has about 300 people, annual residents, year-round residents. How does a strong feminist, devout Buddhist um, figure that it's a prudent thing to create a fine diner in a small town in conservative and Mormon, largely Mormon run community?
I
What did
don't really know how to even explain it, except the best I can do is say it was kind of like a calling.
hmm.
Like there was a way that it wasn't, if I had considered the facts more deeply, it would have been, it wouldn't have seemed like a good idea, but there was just this feeling in me that it was what we needed to do. And
Hmm.
so Jen and I had been working together doing catering and doing some extreme catering for the Discovery Channel. Like when they would go to like in the early days of reality TV, and we worked really well together. And I was married to a man at the time, who had a connection with this town. And so we came here because he wanted to have like our, wedding celebration here. And when we got here, the people who have the building that we rent were like, there's no restaurant here anymore. Would you want to just have the restaurant instead of renting it out for a wedding? And so I talked to Jen, and I was like, it's kind of interesting. I was like, I have a really strong feeling that I'm supposed to do this. And would you do it with me? Because I'm not going to do it without you. And she was like, she and her boyfriend had just broken up, and she was thinking about moving somewhere anyway. So we packed up and moved here, and we kind of started this restaurant with a year's free rent and $3,000 borrowed dollars.
Wow.
And
Bootstraps.
Janet, yeah, and there was already tables and chairs and a stove and the basic bare bones of it. And yeah, we planted a garden and got busy with it. And I hadn't spent very much time in Utah, so I had ideas about it. When we arrived here, what was really interesting was that, mostly the Mormon rancher population was really welcoming and kind to us. It was more the sort of people who moved here because of Y2K, like the preppers, and the people who maybe in some ways were more ideologically aligned with Jen and I. Those people were not as welcoming. And so that was a big surprise.
So how did you build bridges, even if the long-term townspeople there, the ranch people there were somewhat welcoming or quite welcoming, there still had to be some bridge building, given the religious difference, given two women, given your strong environmental biases. How did you build some bridges?
Well, I grew up underprivileged, poor. And so I started working really young. Like I had my first job when I was 8 years old, and then first job in a restaurant around when I was around 12. And so one of the first things we did was, any of the children in town that were of legal age to work and that wanted to work, we encouraged them to come, and we taught them skills. And there were a lot of kids of the ranching families that worked for us, and we paid them well, and we cared for them, like deeply loved them, and and taught them and helped them go to college and things like that. And so I think that was a major slow bridge, but that was definitely very intentional for me. It's not always easiest to like employ young people, teenagers and such, but the kids here by and large were really hard workers because they grew up in ranching families and like that. And then, we hosted a lot of community events before we even opened the restaurant to the public. We did an open house where we made a lot of food and invited all the townspeople to come, and that was really neat. A lot of people came. We started doing a 4th of July, like Interdependence Day, we called it. That was
Explain that. Yeah, explain that. That's a
yeah.
great
So
phrase.
instead of it just being like patriotic for the country, it was more like building community. So we did a joint celebration with the people who own the lodge that we're on the grounds of. That was like a talent show and ice cream social. And Jen and I supplied all the ice cream, and our crew would make ice cream sundaes for everyone. We haven't done it for the last few years for various reasons, but now the town itself has kind of picked up the whole 4th of July celebration, and that's great. And so we support them in that. But things like that, and we always host an Easter egg hunt and make muffins and cookies and invite all the local kids. And we've tried to be good citizens. We had a really good run of a lot of years of like feeling like we had, really, I don't know, it's a little tender, like that we had made real inroads and sort of built relationships, and then unfortunately with Trump's election, the polarization of that affected the whole country deeply divided our community as well. And, subsequent to that, or part of that was that, we would have never chosen to move to Boulder and start our business here were it not for the declaration of Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument, which was established by President Clinton in 1996. And then we came here and opened our restaurant in 2000. And so then shortly after Trump was elected, he, with the blessing and encouragement of the Utah governor and Utah delegation, cut Grand Staircase by half with the express intent to give it over to extractive industry. And at that time, basically the day after Trump got elected, I knew what was going to happen. So I resigned off of all the boards I was sitting on and things like that, and, told Jen and our staff that my job was going to change and that I was going to need to fight for the monument. And so I did, but it was at, it was kind of at great personal cost in a lot of ways. Like, there's people now in town that I think historically liked me that don't like me anymore, which is a bummer, and it's not what I wanted. But also in the larger scale of things, for me, there was a article that got written that was pretty amazing. I've been a long time fan of long form journalism. That's mainly what I read. And so, of course, I subscribe to the New Yorker.
Yeah.
And we were the feature of a very long form article by the inimitable Catherine Schultz in 2018 in the New Yorker, which was so wild. Like, in my wildest life imaginings, it would have never occurred to me to think that I would be in an article in the New Yorker under any circumstances, but there we were. And so my point, I guess, is that somebody in town, and I have some ideas about who it might have been, like, took the cover page of that and Xeroxed a bunch of copies and wrote, "If you really cared about Boulder, you'd keep it a secret," and posted it all over town, like kind of. And I thought about that a lot. And, in a certain way, this person had a point. And the point is really, I'm here for the land and the wilderness, and that's why I moved here. I wouldn't have chosen to move to Boulder were it not for the monument. So I do love my community, and I love living here, and there's a lot of really extraordinary people here and compelling reasons to live in Boulder. But, in the final analysis, the real reason I'm here is for the wilderness. And so keeping the wild places intact and safe is my top priority. And, so people will come at me with like, "Oh, well, then why do you publicize it?" and this and that. And I don't really think that that's what we're doing. Like, in my mind, just sort of like when you take a group of 20 people down the Colorado River on a Grand Canyon River trip, yes, you are impacting that place because there's more people walking around. But I would argue that humans really need to understand how critical wild places are in order for them to relate to them in such a way that they'll prioritize their protection. And so the hidden agenda, if you will, of the restaurant always was to open people's hearts and minds to the inherent value of a wild place. And for that to happen, our idea was to kind of create a warm hearth that people could gather around metaphorically as they, get ready to go out and have a genuine wilderness experience, and then a warm hearth, metaphorically, to return to afterwards to tell their story. And that really has been our kind of business model, along with sort of like a really genuine sense of like radical hospitality,
Mm.
and care for our customers, and care for the planet, care for the food we're serving, care for our employees. And, so this whole thing of Trump effectively destroying the monument, because a lot of people, when they hear that he cut it by half, they're like, well, half, maybe it's still 1 million acres and maybe that's enough. But the way they did it was extremely destructive, because when Clinton and Bruce Babbitt declared it, they did it super intentionally. It was really designated for science purposes.
Hmm.
And so it was contiguous to so much other protected land, state parks, national parks, Forest Service, on and on, wilderness areas. And the way the new monument was drawn was just 3 really distinct island chunks of land that totaled still 1 million acres, but we're no longer contiguous to anything. And so the devastation potentially that was going to be wrought by this this order was extremely significant.
Yeah.
And it's, so that's why I had to go and fight.
Yeah. So the if it's not contiguous, then you've got little islands of isolation, but all around it was slated to be or eligible to be mined or otherwise abused.
Correct. Chained,
Yeah.
the juniper trees chained, like the original habitats destroyed.
Yeah.
Extractive industry, mining certainly, but also fracking, all kinds of badness.
Yeah. So an underlying goal of this podcast is to give people a sense of hope, a chance to just
Yeah.
take a deep breath, something tangible for them to sink their teeth into in terms of good change. And then in addition to that, pearls of wisdom for people to adopt into their own life as anchors, maybe for lack of a better term, anchors or catalysts, for them to take action. And what I'm hearing you say in how you described coming to Boulder and then facing some of the discord and some of the challenges and having that amplified over the last few years, through it all, you stayed true to your beliefs. And those are beliefs that are slanted towards, geared towards, driven by preservation, a warm hearth, which I love that idea, a warm hearth for people to gather around and share experiences. So speak to me a little bit, speak to us a little bit about the importance of just sticking to what matters to you as a foundation to change.
Well, I guess what I would say is that really my core belief is that what is important is love.
Hmm.
And so I think, whatever you're doing, whether it's fighting for a piece of protected wilderness or a certain kind of animal that you feel really tenderly towards, or you're engaging in social justice work, to really address inequity. I think if you're doing it, if you're coming at it from a place of like love, which sounds really simple, but I think it's really then that's what makes the work sustainable, because love is the ultimate renewable resource, and energy that I think drives certainly humans, but probably animals too. So I think, that trying to always err on the side of love and compassion and kind of steering away from fighting against what you hate and instead fighting for what you love. And then the fight becomes enlivening. And maybe it's not even a fight anymore. Maybe it's appropriate to think of it as more love, you know, and love takes a lot of forms. And, you know, certainly I've had a lot of anger about the destruction and those who will have the will to destroy, the world eaters, I would call them, you know, but I think even that rage can be made holy if it's coming from a place of really deep abiding love and compassion for the suffering of the voiceless. Does that make sense, Ken?
It does. It makes complete sense, and it's poetic. It not only makes sense, it's poetic. And I hearken back to what you said earlier about when you came into town and offered the teenagers in the town work at the restaurant. And what crossed my mind when you said that was that you weren't only tending to their economics, to the financial situation, but you were tending to their hearts, because you were giving them an opportunity to do something that otherwise would have never come their way. And so in a sense, that's the same thing as operating from a position of love, as you reached out and tended to the hearts of the people in the community. And even more so, the kids in the community, which is a great way to anybody's heart and a great way to have anybody feel like you're driven by love.
Well, and that's been really rewarding. Even there's one young woman, she's not even that young anymore. She has 3 children, but who started working with us when she was like 13. And she's now a manager for us. And, you know, she went away and went to school and, you know, married another young man who also worked for us from town, and they are ranchers here. And I'm super close with their family, you know, and a lot of the kids that worked here historically, you know, when they come back for family reunions and stuff, they'll come by and see us and bring their kids. And it is a really, you know, those long, I mean, that's the other thing, I guess, that I could say is like, it's very easy to look at sort of the problems of the world and think, oh, this is an impossible problem. And I think one of the important things is just slowly change happens, you know, an incremental change is really where things, where the good stuff occurs. You know, it's, if you try to tell yourself you have to make a difference like that and snap your fingers and you've changed something, you're really gonna feel frustrated. But I think, like, to pick something that you are passionate about and then think about how to incrementally change a broken system. We're all trapped in so many sick systems, you know, right now. You know, military industrial complex and sort of massive capitalism and racial injustice and inequity. And all of these things conspire to strip us of our humanity and sort of even our sense of being able to do anything. And so we think if we take our cloth bags to the grocery store, maybe, you know, maybe we're making a difference, but really there's almost like, and of course, always doing whatever you can to deepen your own sort of sense of self-respect, whether that's composting or recycling or cloth bags to the store, but understanding and kind of getting ourselves off the hook in a way as individuals. What we really have to fight is the enormous sick systems that we're stuck in, and then looking at incremental change and how to do that from where we are. And I would argue again, it starts with love, and it's for me, like, the great love of my life is planet Earth. You know, I love this planet. I'm a super duper terrestrial, you know, and so, you know, one of the sort of sick systems that I see that we're trapped in, that's just starting to get some traction, but is this sort of human-centric way of thinking of the world, that everything that's here is for the commodification, pleasure, utilization, and use of for humans. And I would argue that trees and streams and creeks and bees and bears, they should have a right to exist in and of themselves, and that's the sick system that I've sort of decided to try to address in my work.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm not going to be able to solve that. Like, there's not a chance. But like, if you look at like the powerful work of some of the young people of today, like Greta Thunberg and Malala, and you know, a young friend of mine named Robbie Bond, who started Kids Speak for Parks. I think if you just pick something out of a sense of love and care and a wish to help, and just start talking about it, and build kind of a use your voice in whatever way will carry, there's a great likelihood that there's a lot of other people that feel the same way as you, that wanted someone to say, hey, let's think about this differently. What if what if what if we stopped cutting down old growth forests, and decided that they had a utility beyond sort of extractive,
Yeah.
Their extractable capacity.
Yeah.
And what we know now is everyone's all worried about climate crisis, and we really need to be worried about climate crisis, because climate crisis is quickly evolving into climate chaos. We know that we have like the world's best natural technology to address it, and it's trees. And yet we're still cutting them down. That's not logical.
Yep.
So like, figuring out that we're going to save, and that's, tangentially and not, but really I've worked and worked and worked to try to save Grand Staircase. It looks like now it's going to be saved.
Right on. Right on. Congratulations and great work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that it's only saved for a minute, because if we don't get a handle on climate crisis, all those animals and trees are going to burn up anyway.
Yeah.
And so, I'm moving now my scope of work. I'm like, well, we need to save these large, intact, vast swaths of public lands, not just for us so we can visit them, not just even for the honeybees that live out there, not for the mountain lions and like that, but really for the larger good of the planet. We need vast intact swaths of land that will get left alone, because they're the lungs and the sort of holders of our biodiversity.
And you're not just manifesting change through your activism in the form of communicating to political leaders and making sure that your voice is being heard on a national level, but you're also doing that with your restaurant operation, with producing a significant amount of the food that you serve on your own locally, and eliminating so much expense and so much environmental degradation of the supply chain.
Yes. I mean, a huge driver of climate crisis and global warming is bad ag, conventional. We call it conventional, but really it's industrial. Food production is a nightmare, and the way we handle food waste is absolutely a nightmare, in terms of creating having harmful side effects. And so regenerative agriculture is really the way we need to move into the future, because there are ways to grow food and to raise livestock that actually sequester carbon, and they're more labor intensive, but like, when we really look at the actual costs of food production, the cheap food is going to be the death of us all one way or another. And so I'm really looking forward to, there being some political support for the first time ever for small organic farms and regenerative agriculture operations. We've got to get a handle on the way we're producing food. And, my real work, for the last 20 years has been to try to just convince people to eat food that was grown in a thoughtful, loving, and not destructive way. And the truth of the matter is, if you grow food in poisons, you're ingesting poisons. You cannot wash them off.
Yeah.
That's like not a logical thing. Like all of us did those experiments when we were in first grade where you put, blue food dye in a
Yeah.
thing of water and you put a carnation in there and you come back the next morning and voila, your carnation is turned blue. That's how a cauliflower is too. If you grow it in poison, it's got poison in it. And so, everyone needs to really think about prioritizing food that was grown in a clean way, because as animals, we bioaccumulate everything that we eat. So if you're eating food that's grown in poison, it's why we have such a, horrendous problem in our country with autoimmune disorders and cancers and things like diabetes and all of these illnesses that can be traced back to what we are consuming.
Yeah.
It's very sad. And we've been sold a lot of lies.
Yeah.
And like, I cannot wait for the day when we look back in time and are like, can you believe that people used to grow food with poison and think it was a good idea? Like,
Yeah.
it's so illogical. I just can't even. So, yeah, anyway, my work has been trying to educate people about that and to show that it can be done. Because when Jen and I started this restaurant, there were only a handful of restaurants in America, mostly run by women, that were even that were doing anything with organic food. Like, it was sort of common thought back
And
then that
and
it
what
was
what
impossible.
what year was that?
2000,
So
and it
in
was like Alice Waters in Berkeley
yeah.
and Nora Pouliot in DC and Piper Odessa and, a few other places,
So in
but mostly,
20 years, there's been a significant shift away from the use, and obviously it's not a great enough shift yet, but away from the use of poison foods to more organically grown foods and locally grown organic foods for
yeah, and
restaurants and
it's
otherwise.
all super tied in with issues of race and social
Mhm.
justice and equity, because unfortunately, our paradigm is super inverted. So the large destructive poison growing food makers of the world get massive subsidies to grow food that's poisoning the humans and the planet. And then small organic farms have these incredible obstacles, no financial support from the government, and we really need to flip that narrative. We need to change that.
So
And
you,
I know a lot of people are working on it. So
I think as an example, and it's definitely not apples to apples, but with the shutdown with COVID significantly impacting cinemas and live entertainment venues, a friend of mine owns one of the larger independent movie cinema chains in the country, but it's still microscopic compared to the big ones like Regal. But Congress recently passed, and I don't think it's been funded yet, but it recently passed as part of the aid bill, funds directed specifically at small entertainment venues, whether it's a cinema or a live place, because of the impact that they felt and their inability to sustain throughout this whole thing because they didn't have millions or billions in reserve. And so maybe, just maybe, and you talked a little bit earlier about the fact that organic farms may be getting some treatment, some positive treatment from the federal agencies. Maybe we're headed in the right direction.
I think we are, but one thing I'll say that I've learned in the last 4 years is that the only way we're going to change anything is by really, really shoring up our democracy. And so we have to make it to where people like my Indigenous friends are able to vote. And, I've worked with some nonprofits that are really working on that. But, sadly, tragically, horrendously, the marginalized populations of our country have largely been marginalized by a GOP that doesn't want them to vote because they don't vote for them. And so gerrymandering and, on and on and on, as you probably know from the news, just like in the last week, over
Crazy.
200 bills have been filed by Republican senators and Congress people to try to reduce access to ballots.
Crazy. Yep.
It is. It's so rough, but so that's the real thing is like, I cannot overstate the importance of getting people engaged in the political process, teaching people about how it works, and getting people out to vote, and shoring up our electoral process, because everything. I mean, what I remember, the day after the election in 2016, all my employees sort of marching into the restaurant in tears, and like a lot of them didn't choose to vote. They thought it didn't matter, their vote. And I said, you're about to learn an incredibly painful lesson that there's literally nothing that matters to you that can't be made political, that won't be politicized.
Right.
Your internet, your rights to your body, your sexuality, the food you eat, the air you breathe, the water you drink, the very ground you stand on, everything is up for grabs. And we saw how close we came to losing everything, and so really, whatever you love, make sure you're backing it up with registering people to vote.
So along those lines, that's great advice. And here's a question for you. Let's say that you had an opportunity in your restaurant to have the leadership, the national leadership, federal leadership of the Republican Party, 2 or 3 senators or representatives, and then on this other side of the table, metaphorically and maybe literally would be 2 or 3 members of the Democratic leadership group. And then as a practicing Buddhist, I'm wondering if Buddha were to walk in and sit down and break bread with these folks, what do you think he would say?
I think he'd give the GOP a really big scolding.
And why?
Because their policies have changed, and they're not based on loving kindness. They're not based on the teachings of Christ. They're not based on good heart. They're they've morphed into something incredibly cruel, and cruelty is a non-starter with the Buddha. So I think maybe, I can't really say that I could speak for the Buddha, but I think he would ask them, I mean, gosh, that is a hard one, Ken. I mean, the sad thing is, like, really, hate just creates more hate. And so they're in a very bad death spiral right now with that, hating people of color, hating, women with any political agency, hating, I don't really know what to make of it. So I guess I couldn't say what the Buddha would say. Maybe he would give them a teaching on karma, cause, and effect in a way that would frighten them.
And what would that look like? What would that be?
It would be like, if you plant seeds of hate, you're going to grow a hate tree. If you plant seeds of love, you're going to grow a seed. I mean, I guess I would say that's like maybe to go all the way back to what I was saying. If you're fighting against what you hate rather than fighting for what you love, there's a really qualitative difference. So the idea of karma, cause, and effect is not like there's some outer judge and jury that's watching you, that's going to, give you a failing grade and cause you a consequence. It's that it plants your habits in your own psyche. So if you're planting seeds of goodness and love, you're going to bear a goodness and love tree. If you're planting seeds of cruelty and bullying and hatred, you're going to grow a tree that's going to give you a lot more bullying, cruelty, and hatred
Yeah,
fruits.
that that takes me back to the comment or the question or the idea that people really want something to sink their teeth into in terms of how they can manifest change or how they see change happening. And you've repeated this theme several beautiful times, and that is simply come at it from love. And maybe a cornerstone shift in behavior for all of us would be just that: is to, if you're given an opportunity to trust instead of fear, if you're given an opportunity to share instead of keep, always err on the side of trust and love.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean you're not going to get your ass kicked.
Yeah, right.
But really, like, at the end of the day, it's better to keep planting seeds of love than to stop planting them because somebody was awful to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, is like, we don't know what's going to happen. There's a lot of dire predictions right now about everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say is, I really have a lot of faith in the goodness of humans. I have a lot of faith in the wisdom and sort of just extraordinary system that is our planet, and I would like us to stop. I would like us to find a way out of all of the sort of sick systems that are keeping us stuck in these cycles of abuse and war and inequity. And I think every second you close your eyes and you open them and the whole world's changed.
Yeah, it's so
Somebody
fast.
was born and somebody died, and something extraordinary just happened, and someone fell in love in that moment, and anything can happen. And so, I have this amazing friend who, you asked me in an email, like, what book, and I couldn't really think, because I read a lot, but I have some amazing women friends that I take a lot of inspiration from. And one of them is this woman, Rebecca Solnit, who is just a brilliant mind, and she and I have become quite close. And her thing that she talks about that I just love is that, hope is not a passive thing. Like, it's a practice, it's a discipline, and it's tethered and sort of shored up by action. So if you can do things in your life, whatever it is, that give you a sense of hope, which she would argue, and I agree, is really, really different from optimism. Like, so optimism is sort of saying, like, everything's going to be fine, so I don't have to do much.
Yeah.
Like, pessimism says nothing's going to work, so I give up and I'm just going to, live on Cheetos and binge watch Netflix. Hope is an action. It's a verb. It's something that we engage in with, but it's tethered to our ability to actually act. So whatever we can do to deepen our own sense of self-respect, and really ask ourselves that question: where could I deepen my own sense of self-respect? What could I do? And how can I help someone else? Whether it's honeybees, if that's your thing, or it's beavers, or it's dolphins, or it's, you know, poor, underprivileged inner city kids that need education. There's so much. The needs of the world are great, and then figuring out where that need and our own sense of well-being and kind of, self-respect and hope can dovetail. That's how we can change the world.
Wow.
And we can do it in very small ways that can turn into big things.
Mm-hmm. So, speaking of great books, and I've read a couple of Rebecca Solnit's book and love that she writes about the hurricane in New Orleans and about the perceptions that we were fed versus the reality on the ground. And Coming to situations like that with a clear vision without bias, and then infusing them with hope, it makes all the difference in the world. But speaking of good books, I've got one of yours right here. And I want to
Aw.
talk to you a little bit about recipes, but in the introduction, there's Terry Tempest Williams writes about the importance of coming to a situation with the intention of creating beauty. And I get the sense from what you've done, what you and Jen have done, that was a cornerstone, and based on this conversation, obviously that supports that was a cornerstone to building your place. And I just wanted to read a couple of menu items that clearly are a product of creativity and love and a desire for people to get together and really enjoy each other's company while consuming phenomenal food. So the one that caught my eye right off the bat was spicy cowgirl chipotle meatloaf, which if I could have a plate of that right now, that would be fantastic. And then cup of Three Sisters pozole. There's the red chili beef brisket tamales. I mean, how do you, I would get so fat if I worked at this restaurant. So,
No, you wouldn't, because our food is nutrient dense.
Oh, okay. What does that mean exactly?
Well, it just means that it's available to your system to nourish you. A lot of food in our society is, just empty, devoid of actual nutrients. So what makes people generally fat is empty calories, not nutrient dense food. So you'd be fine.
Okay. And then along those lines, I'm happy to hear that, because I'm actually trying to lose weight, and I've read about the importance of nutrient dense foods, and I'm trying to get rid of those that aren't. But talk to me just a little bit for a few minutes here about what it's like to run a world-class diner that is clearly a labor of love, with a team that is supported and encouraged, and to have essentially a lifelong partner that has helped create this amazing place. Thinking of Terry Tempest Williams, that was created with the intention of bringing more beauty into the world, just on a daily basis. How are you most rewarded? How are you most rewarded from your operation?
Yeah, I mean, last year was so hard because of the pandemic that I'm still like kind of trying to process everything that happened. But I think for Jen and I, our business model was always like kind of hilariously like aggressive hospitality. Like we both traveled a lot in our youth, separately. We met, we've worked together now for probably like 23 years. So not quite a lifelong business partner, but
A long time.
a long time, yeah. And so one of the things that's most rewarding for me is that relationship. Like Jen is just a really brilliant, creative, funny, probably one of the smartest humans I've ever met, and super hardworking. And so I'm very inspired by her. And our work relationship is we're really fortunate, like we just really love to work together. And it's that. I love making people happy. I love nourishing people. And, I really do think there's a tremendous value in helping people come to a place and have a genuine wilderness experience.
Wow.
The more sort of ramped up and fast-paced our life has been, and, everything changed with the pandemic, I think a lot of people had a lot more time for self-reflection. Than, but we're all tethered to our phones and to our devices. And from a Buddhist vantage point is how can I be of benefit? Like how do I use my precious human rebirth to be of benefit in this world and to help alleviate suffering and create happiness? And so for me, it's landed with this crazy madcap fever dream of a restaurant, which, is an extraordinarily busy place. We do a huge volume of business, and it didn't used to be like that. And so it's also always changing. And so that in a way keeps us into is, just we're always trying to figure out how to do it better and how to do, have it be less effort and more joy.
Yeah.
And I really treasure the relationships with our team. A lot of our staff have worked for us for a really long time. And so there's a very much of a kind of a built-in community. I don't really like to say it's like a family because it's kind of different than that, but we care for one another. We're there for each other in a way that, maybe is even more than what a lot of families can do.
Yeah.
We choose to live in this community. We choose to work together, and those relationships are really significant.
And I love that. And that may be a great spot to leave, because if that can ripple out, if that can mushroom out, if that can just evolve beyond a restaurant wall, beyond a community, beyond a region, out to a state, and then nation and world, caring for each other, tending to each other, and producing nourishing and replenishing environments is about as good as it could get. And so I really want to say thank you. And any last words of wisdom or reflections or recommendations for us?
I don't know. I think, this last year with the pandemic has given us all time to really, take a pause and kind of get off that spinning wheel that we've all created. And I think moving out of this time, out of this limbic space into a more thoughtful, intentional, how do I want to use my remaining days on this planet? I think really giving yourself the time and the permission to engage with that kind of open-hearted question. How do I want to show up for what's coming? And we do have an opportunity in this time to make real change and find something and sink your teeth in, run for office, or join a nonprofit, or start your own campaign to address some inequity that you see in society. And I think it's hard, but I think we all have something we love enough to fight for it. So fight for what you love, and let's save this planet.
Right on. Well, I've loved this hour. I'm sure our viewers and listeners will glean inspiration and hope and ideas to take out into the world in order to make their communities better. I salute you and Jen for what you built. My hat goes off to you for your staunch environmental work, and look forward to another conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Ken. I'm hugging you from across the miles.
Right back at you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With every show, we ask our guests to share a video of them doing something fun. One of their favorite songs, a few lines from a book they enjoyed, or a scene from a great movie. Something that matches their hopes, dreams, and good work. And then we give this to you. Because laughter and beauty soothes, heals, and changes us. You can find and unwrap this gift on any of our social media sites. Thank you for participating in this podcast. Until next time, keep an eye out for change, good change, and join our movement at kenstreeter.com.